The sharp, sudden crack of a body hitting the polished airport floor cut through the dull murmur of the terminal. It was a sound of finality, of gravity winning a fight that no one knew was happening. A young man in the crisp green service uniform of a United States Marine lay crumpled and still near the front of the TSA security line. Chaos erupted in a wave. A woman screamed. A child started crying. People backed away, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, their phones already emerging from pockets. From the center of the disruption, a TSA agent's voice barked with an authority that bordered on panic. "Nobody move. Stay right where you are. I need this area cleared." Douglas Nichols, 83 years old, felt the familiar thrum in his chest, a deep, resonant chord that hadn't played in decades. It was the signal. Trouble. He had been just another face in the crowd, a stooped figure in a worn tweed jacket, shuffling forward in the line to catch his flight to visit his granddaughter. Now his eyes, clouded with age but sharp with purpose, were locked on the fallen Marine. He saw the unnatural angle of the young man's body, the shallow, rapid flutter of his chest. He took a single, deliberate step out of the line. "Hey, you, old man, where do you think you're going?" The voice belonged to a TSA supervisor, a man named Miller whose chest was puffed out with the importance of his navy blue uniform. He was young, with a severe haircut and an expression that suggested he enjoyed the small dominions he ruled. He put a hand out, a stiff barrier between Douglas and the Marine. "I said nobody moves. This is a security incident." Douglas didn't even look at him. His focus was entirely on the young man on the floor. "He needs help," Douglas said, his voice a low, gravelly thing, quiet but carrying an undeniable weight. "I'm a medic." Miller scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "Yeah, sure you are. Everyone's a doctor in an emergency. Now step back with the others before I have you removed. We have professionals on the way." Douglas ignored the hand in front of him and continued to move forward, his gait slow but relentlessly steady. The crowd watched, a silent theater of faces. The tension in the air was thick enough to taste. The young Marine on the floor let out a low groan, his eyes fluttering weakly. Douglas could see the faint sheen of sweat on his pale forehead, the subtle bluish tint to his lips. Hypoxia. Shock. Something was critically wrong. Miller, enraged by the defiance, stepped directly in Douglas's path, his face inches away. The smell of stale coffee and self-importance washed over Douglas. "Are you deaf?" Miller hissed, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "This is a secure federal checkpoint. My authority here is absolute. You so much as touch him and I'll have you in a holding cell for interfering with a federal officer. Do you understand me, Grandpa?" Douglas finally met the agent's eyes. There was no fear in his gaze, no anger. There was only a profound, weary disappointment. He held up his gnarled hands. These hands have set bones in rice paddies and stitched arteries in the bellies of helicopters. They know what they're doing. Now are you going to let me help this boy, or are you going to stand there and watch him die while you wait for your professionals? The directness of the question, the sheer unadorned gravity of it, seemed to stun Miller into a momentary silence. In that instant, Douglas sidestepped him and knelt beside the fallen Marine. The fabric of his old trousers creaked. He placed 2 fingers on the Marine's neck, finding the carotid artery. The pulse was thready, fast, too fast. He gently tilted the Marine's head back to open his airway, his movements economical and sure, a stark contrast to the frantic energy swirling around them. "Son, can you hear me?" Douglas murmured, his voice gentle. "What's your name?" The Marine's eyes flickered open. They were unfocused, clouded with pain. "Corporal Riley," he whispered, the words barely audible. "Leg. My leg." Douglas's eyes scanned down. He saw the slight bulge under the Marine's green trousers, the rigid outline of a heavy-duty medical brace. He also saw the way the Marine's hand was clenched over his abdomen. This wasn't just about the leg. Miller, recovering his composure, grew even more incensed. He saw his authority being dismantled in front of 100 pairs of eyes. "That's it. I've had it," he shouted, his voice cracking. "I'm calling airport police. You are being detained." He reached for the radio on his shoulder, his face flushed a deep, blotchy red. Other TSA agents exchanged nervous glances, but none dared to intervene. Miller was the supervisor, and his fury was a known hazard. While Miller was posturing, Douglas was working. He'd already unclipped the Marine's tie and unbuttoned the top button of his uniform shirt to ease his breathing. He began speaking to him in a low, calming monologue, a stream of consciousness designed to keep him anchored. "Just stay with me, Corporal Riley. Just breathe. You're going to be fine. We're going to get you sorted out. You're not alone here." He reached for the small, worn olive-drab canvas bag he always carried. It was an old military medic's satchel from another era, faded and stained with the ghosts of 50 years. "What is that?" Miller sneered, his radio call momentarily forgotten. "You can't bring that in here. What's in the bag you're knitting?" Douglas didn't answer. He unfastened the brass clasps. The bag opened not with a jumble, but with the quiet precision of a surgeon's toolkit. Inside, ancient but immaculate instruments and supplies were nestled in canvas loops: forceps, rolls of gauze, a stethoscope, a blood pressure cuff. He pulled out the cuff, its rubber bulb cracked with age. As his fingers wrapped around the familiar tool, the sterile, air-conditioned terminal around him dissolved. The air became thick, wet, and hot, smelling of mud and iron. He was 21 again, crammed in a sandbag bunker, the world outside exploding in a symphony of screams and machine gun fire. Rain lashed down, turning the floor to a slick, red-brown soup. A young soldier no older than Corporal Riley was on a makeshift cot in front of him, his chest a ruin of blood and fabric. Douglas's hands, young and steady, flew across the boy's body, working by the dim, flickering light of a single lantern. He pulled a chest seal from that same olive-drab bag, slapping it over the wound. His entire world narrowed to that single desperate act of preservation against the howling chaos of the Vietnam jungle. The memory was a lightning strike, a single searing second of visceral recall, and then it was gone. He was back on the cold tile floor of the airport, the face of the young Marine in front of him. The past was a ghost, but the skills were bone deep. He wrapped the cuff around Riley's arm, his focus absolute. Across the concourse, standing near a Cinnabon, a woman had been watching the entire exchange with a trained and critical eye. She wasn't a tourist. Retired Air Force Colonel Sarah Jenkins carried herself with an erect posture that no amount of civilian life could soften. She saw it all: the young Marine's disciplined uniform, the obvious signs of medical distress, the TSA agent's dangerous, ego-driven incompetence, and most importantly, the old man's quiet, almost unnerving, competence. She had seen medics like him before, in field hospitals in Kandahar and triage tents in Baghdad. They moved with a purpose that was earned, not taught. When she heard the Marine gasp out his name and saw the old man go to work, she knew a procedural delay could become a fatal one. She pulled out her phone, but she didn't dial 911. She scrolled through her contacts to a number she hadn't used in years: the 24-hour duty officer for the Department of Defense Airport Liaison. A young voice, a lieutenant, answered. "LAX DOD Liaison, how can I help you?" "This is retired Colonel Sarah Jenkins," she said, her voice sharp and clear, cutting through the line static. "I am at Terminal 4, TSA Checkpoint Bravo. We have a United States Marine down, collapsed and in severe medical distress. A civilian TSA supervisor is actively obstructing a medic from rendering aid. I repeat, he is obstructing aid. Ma'am, we can call airport paramedics," the lieutenant began, his voice laced with practiced procedure. "They've been called." Jenkins cut him off, her patience gone. "But this TSA agent is threatening to arrest the man trying to help him. The Marine is Corporal Riley. The medic's name is Douglas Nichols. He appears to be a veteran. Now, I don't know who Douglas Nichols is, but he moves like a combat surgeon, and your Marine is going into shock on the floor while a glorified mall cop plays king. I suggest you escalate this immediately." She hung up, her part in the drama played. She had lit the fuse. Now she would wait for the explosion. Inside a sterile office at the nearby Los Angeles Air Force Base, the young Air Force captain who took Colonel Jenkins's message felt a jolt of alarm. The term obstructing aid was a serious one, especially when it involved a uniformed Marine. He did as he was trained, creating a log of the incident. He typed in the Marine's name, Corporal Riley, and flagged it. Then, more out of diligence than anything else, he typed in the name of the civilian medic, Douglas Nichols. He hit enter. The result that flashed on his screen wasn't a driver's license record or a civilian profile. It was a heavily flagged Department of Defense file. A cascade of alerts and protocols blinked red across his monitor. The captain stared, his mouth suddenly dry. He shot to his feet, the wheels of his office chair screaming across the linoleum as it flew backward. "Major," he yelled, his voice tight with disbelief. "Sir, you need to see this right now." Major Thompson, a career officer with a perpetually tired expression, ambled over, a half-eaten bagel in his hand. "What is it, Captain? Did the coffee machine break again?" The captain just pointed at the screen, speechless. Thompson leaned in, squinting. He read the name, then the primary flag on the file. His eyes widened. The bagel dropped from his hand, landing on the floor with a soft thud. He didn't notice. "Oh my God," he breathed. "Get the base commander on the line. No, forget that. Get me General Matthews' aide. Tell them it's a Code 1, a Sentinel event." "A Sentinel event, sir." the captain asked, unfamiliar with the term. The major looked at him, his face pale. It's a designation we came up with years ago, for the quiet ones. The legends you read about in history books. It means one of our nation's highest-level heroes is in a situation, and we are to respond with overwhelming force and absolute deference. Go, now. Back at the airport, Douglas had successfully taken Corporal Riley's blood pressure. It was dangerously low. The young man was fading, his skin now cold and clammy to the touch. Douglas knew he was bleeding internally. The leg injury was a distraction. The real enemy was inside. He maintained gentle pressure on the Marine's abdomen, trying to slow the hemorrhaging. Paramedics were still nowhere in sight. Agent Miller had finally made his call. He stood with his chest puffed out, speaking into his radio. Yes, I have a non-compliant individual interfering with a medical situation. I need him removed. He is elderly, but aggressive. The absurdity of the statement was lost on him. Douglas, who hadn't raised his voice or made a single threatening gesture, was now being painted as the aggressor. Having finished his call, Miller felt emboldened. His cavalry was on its way. This was his chance to reassert his dominance. He strode over to where Douglas knelt, his shadow falling over the old medic and the dying Marine. All right, that's enough, Miller said, his voice dripping with condescending finality. You've had your little playtime doctor moment. The police are on their way to take you for a nice long chat. I'm giving you one final chance to stand up, put your hands behind your back, and surrender to my authority. If you refuse, I will consider it assault. He unclipped a pair of zip-tie cuffs from his belt, the plastic rasping loudly in the tense silence. It was the ultimate overreach, the final, irrevocable step past the line of reason and into the realm of pure ego. Douglas didn't even look up. This boy is bleeding out, he said, his voice flat and tired. And you're worried about your authority. Just as Miller bent down, reaching to grab Douglas's shoulder, a new sound pierced the terminal's atmosphere. It began as a faint, distant siren, then another, and another, layering on top of each other until it became a unified, screaming wall of noise that was growing closer at an impossible speed. Heads turned toward the glass walls of the terminal. Down on the tarmac, an entire convoy of black SUVs and military police vehicles, lights flashing in a dazzling, frantic rhythm, was screeching to a halt on the curb, a place no civilian vehicle was ever allowed to even pause. The doors of the lead SUV flew open before it had even fully stopped. A tall, ramrod-straight figure in a decorated Army service uniform emerged. On his shoulders glittered the 2 silver stars of a major general. He moved with an explosive purpose, his retinue of colonels and majors struggling to keep pace as he strode into the terminal, his face a thundercloud of controlled fury. The crowd, which had been a loose collection of individuals, now became a single, silent entity, parting before the uniformed procession like the sea before Moses. Airport police, who had just been ambling toward the security checkpoint to deal with Miller's aggressive elderly man, stopped dead in their tracks, their expressions turning to awe and confusion. The general, a man named Matthews, didn't look at the TSA agents. He didn't look at the gawking crowd. His eyes scanned the scene and locked onto the stooped, white-haired figure kneeling on the floor. He walked directly to him, his polished black shoes clicking sharply on the tile. He came to a halt 2 feet from Douglas, his posture ramrod straight. In the cavernous, suddenly silent hall, he raised his hand to his brow in a salute so crisp, so perfect it seemed to cut the air. Mr. Nichols, the general's voice boomed, filled with a respect that bordered on reverence. Major General Matthews, it is an honor, sir. Douglas looked up from the pale face of Corporal Riley, his eyes blinking slowly as if surfacing from a great depth. He gave a slight, tired nod. General, this Marine needs a surgeon. Now. Miller stood frozen, his hand still holding the zip-tie cuffs, his jaw hanging open. His entire reality had just been dismantled in the space of a single salute. The world had tilted on its axis, and he was sliding off the edge. General Matthews didn't even grant him a glance. He snapped his fingers, and 2 military medics with a full trauma kit who had followed him in were instantly at Douglas's side, moving with a seamless efficiency as if they were an extension of Douglas's own hands. As they began preparing Corporal Riley for transport, General Matthews turned slightly, addressing his aide but speaking loudly enough for everyone within a 50-foot radius to hear. Colonel, for the benefit of those present, he began, his voice cold as ice, let's provide some context. This man, he gestured with his chin toward Douglas, is former Army Corporal Douglas Nichols. In February of 1968, during the Tet Offensive, his platoon was overrun near Huey. Corporal Nichols, a medic, was wounded in the opening minutes of the firefight. Despite his own injuries, he spent the next 18 hours under continuous enemy fire, moving from man to man in an open field. When the aid station was targeted, he single-handedly defended it with a fallen soldier's rifle, holding off 3 separate enemy advances while simultaneously continuing to treat the wounded. By the time reinforcements arrived, he had saved the lives of 32 men. For his actions, he was awarded the Medal of Honor. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The phones that had been recording the drama were slowly lowered, a spontaneous gesture of respect. People stared at the unassuming old man in the tweed jacket, now seeing him not as a frail senior citizen, but as a giant. Colonel Jenkins, the witness, simply closed her eyes and smiled. She knew it. She knew he was one of the quiet ones. Miller's face had gone from red to a ghostly white. The zip-tie cuffs slipped from his nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor. General Matthews finally turned his gaze upon Miller, and it was with the force of a physical blow. His voice dropped to a low, menacing growl that was far more terrifying than any shout. "You," he said, "were going to arrest this man. You were going to put this American hero in plastic cuffs while he was saving the life of a United States Marine." A higher-ranking TSA official had rushed to the scene, his face a mask of panic. Matthews rounded on him. "I want this agent's name. I want a full and complete report on my desk by 0800 tomorrow. And I want to know what kind of training you are giving your people that allows them to value their own ego over a human life. This incident is a disgrace to this airport and a stain on every uniform in this building." He turned back to Douglas, his expression softening instantly. "Mr. Nichols, we have a surgical team on standby at the base hospital. Corporal Riley is in the best possible hands thanks to you." Douglas slowly pushed himself to his feet, his old knees protesting. He looked past the general, his eyes finding Miller, who was now trying to shrink into himself to become invisible. Douglas felt no triumph, no anger, only a deep, abiding sadness. He walked over to the young TSA agent. "Everyone wears a uniform of some kind, son," Douglas said, his voice soft. "It's supposed to be a symbol of service, of help. Your job is to help people get where they're going safely, not to get in their way. Remember that." He patted Miller's shoulder gently, a gesture of grace the man had not earned, and then turned away. As the military medics wheeled Corporal Riley away on a gurney, Douglas bent down and picked up his old olive-drab medic bag. He clutched the worn canvas handle, and for a fleeting moment, another image filled his mind. It wasn't the chaos of battle this time. It was the blinding sun on a dusty airfield in Da Nang. A young soldier, his arm in a sling, his leg bandaged, was being loaded onto a C-130. It was one of the 32 men he had saved. The soldier stopped, turned, and pushed the very same medic bag into Douglas's hands. "You keep it, Doc," the soldier had said, his voice thick with emotion. "It belongs to you. You saved us all." The bag wasn't just a container for supplies. It was a vessel of gratitude, a physical reminder of a duty performed. In the days that followed, the fallout was swift. The TSA issued a formal public apology to both Douglas Nichols and the Marine Corps. Agent Miller was reassigned to a remote administrative post pending a full review. More significantly, a new national training mandate was developed for all TSA personnel on how to respond to medical emergencies, a module that was informally, then officially, named the Nichols Protocol. About a month later, Douglas was sitting in a quiet coffee shop near his home, reading a newspaper. The bell over the door jingled, and in walked a young man in civilian clothes, looking hesitant and lost. It was Miller. He saw Douglas, and his face tightened. He stood for a long moment, clearly warring with himself, before finally walking over to the table. "Sir," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Nichols, I'm sorry for what I did. There's no excuse." Douglas looked up from his paper, his expression unreadable. He studied Miller's face for a moment, then simply gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit down," he said, his voice gentle. "The coffee's good here. Tell me how you're doing." It was an act of quiet, profound forgiveness, a lesson more powerful than any public rebuke. A week after that, Douglas's doorbell rang. On his porch stood Corporal Riley, leaning on a cane but smiling broadly, his parents beside him. He had made a full recovery. They didn't stay long, but their handshake and the tearful gratitude in their eyes said everything that needed to be said. Douglas Nichols never sought recognition or thanks. He was just a man trying to catch a flight to see his granddaughter. But on a day he expected to be ordinary, his past rose up to meet the present, reminding a terminal full of strangers, and a nation beyond, that the greatest heroes are often the ones who walk among us, their valor hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment they are needed most. If this story of unassuming courage and quiet valor moved you, please take a moment to like, share and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories that honor our nation's heroes.